Okay, so let's gonna start. Once again, greetings from Stockholm. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Thanks for attending this session on how linking the WASH to climate change management. And yeah, welcome to the World Water Week. I would say that at this stage of the week, no one would dispute the linkages between water and climate. However, I mean, this does not mean that integrating this climate change perspective in WASH assessment tools is easy and straightforward. So basically, this is the aim of this session, to discuss about which are the challenges, which are the opportunities of integrating and linking the climate change perspective to these WASH assessment tools. Next slide, please, Honey. So yeah, to start with, let me first introduce myself. My name is Ricard Gine, and I'm a member of the Water and Sanitation department here at SIWI. I will today moderate this session, and basically it will consist of a panel of 3 WASH experts who will share 3 different case studies, and through them, basically we'll try to learn which are the good practices, but also the obstacles and limitations that they faced during the integration of climate issues in the assessment of the enabling environment for WASH. The structure of the session is mainly based on a very short introduction that I will deliver myself. Then we'll have the panel itself. It will be followed by a question and answer session. And finally, we will conclude the session by a few key remarks that will be shared by the end, by Dr. Guy Hutton at the end of the session. However, before we start, some tips for the session. If you are familiar with this kind of sessions, you know that you can type any question that you might have for any of the panelists in the chat box. At the end of the session, at the end of the panel, excuse me, we'll have some time to discuss about them. So please share your doubts, comments, questions using the chat box. And let me also tell you that the whole session will be delivered in English, except the presentation of our colleague from Bolivia, Irma, who will deliver her presentation in Spanish. However, the presentation and the PPT that you can see in your screen is going to be in English, so I hope that it won't be a problem for you to follow her intervention. And in any case, at the end of her intervention, I will try to translate key remarks into English. So let's start. Henning, please. Yeah. Few highlights to briefly define what the WASH or the WASH Bottleneck Analysis Tool is for those that are not familiarized with this tool. We like to say that the WASH is both a tool and a process. And basically, it aims to identify in a collaborative way with all WASH sector stakeholders which are the priorities and the bottlenecks that are constraining the progress in the sector. So basically, based on this identification of bottlenecks, WASH stakeholders jointly develop an action plan to propose solutions, remove these bottlenecks, and hopefully improve service delivery. No need to say that, of course, the focus of this session is on the WASH, but I would say that lessons learned by all 3 key speakers can be largely applied to other sector assessment tools. So basically, the key issue here is to discuss how the WASH sector can integrate a climate perspective into these assessment tools. And basically, how can we consider these climate issues to improve sector performance. You will see in the slide that the WASH has been widely applied globally. Now more than 50 workshops have been conducted in all regions, and basically the implementation has touched different sector levels, both the national and the subnational level. It can also be applied to cover specific sectors, both sanitation, water, and WASH in institutions at both rural and urban areas. So basically, just to highlight that the tool is flexible enough to allow for different implementation approaches. It's also interesting to see that on average, the number of participants in each session is around 50 people. Although, of course, depending on the number of sectors that are going to be assessed, it can be increased up to 100 or 120. So this is one good remark. And then the other is that you will see that the output of these workshops or of this tool is not the assessment per se, it's a kind of action plan that is agreed on through all stakeholders through the whole process. So basically, we are aiming to kind of have this action plan that is agreed and that where priorities identified during the workshop are somehow translated into concrete actions. Next, please. So basically here the question is why and how can we integrate climate change into these assessment tools? As mentioned, this integration might be complex and is far from being easy or straightforward. Basically, there are several issues that can hamper this integration, but on the other hand, we see that it's completely necessary. Basically, in order to broaden the scope and expand the horizon of the analysis, bringing waste services to other water sectors, such as integrated water resources management, trying to identify which are the linkages between water supply and water resources management. Also to improve the coordination with other sectors by including, for instance, actors who are not traditionally considered in this kind of analysis to find solutions to the bottlenecks identified, and mainly to help the waste sector to be part of a more integrated way of developing national priorities for adaptation and mitigation, and of course laying the basis for access to international funding that would not be otherwise accessible. You can see in the graph, Henning, please, that I would say that the integration in these workshops has been a success. You can see that, for instance, the number of criteria that includes climate-related issues in the workshops is substantial, around 60 up to 67 in Tanzania, for instance. And just to have a comparative remark, I would say that in a typical or standard workshop, I would say that not more than 100 and 120 criteria are assessed in total. So basically half of the criteria that were assessed in these 4 workshops related or included somehow the climate perspective. But not only this, it's also relevant to highlight that finally in the action plan, the number of activities that somehow integrated the climate perspective amounted up to 65%, for instance, in Ecuador, meaning that 65% of the activities in the action plan in Ecuador included an aspect related to climate change, or 40% in Santa Cruz, 30% in Montero, or in Tanzania, 20%. But still, 20% of the activities in the action plan in Tanzania included this perspective. So what is not shown in the graph, and basically this is the aim of this session, is to identify and discuss which have been the obstacles and which have been the opportunities of integrating the climate perspective into the assessment, to what extent climate experts participated in the assessment. And next slide, please, Henning. And this is the purpose of this panel. We do have here today 3 different WASH experts that will share their experience when it comes to integrate this climate perspective in the WASH bed. They will represent 3 different case studies from Ecuador, Tanzania, and Bolivia. And having said that, I would love to introduce the first speaker, Mrs. Moa Cortobius, who is a climate change and WASH officer at UNICEF Ecuador. It's remarkable to say that Ecuador was the first country where this climate perspective was integrated in the WASH bed. So I'm sure that we will learn a lot of things from her case study. Moa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ricard, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we're very happy from Ecuador to contribute with what we've had, what we've learned during this process of integrating climate change and looking at how that can be integrated into the WASH bed. Please, next slide. So just to start off with mentioning some of the issues and some of the context that we thought that prompted us as UNICEF to really look into how can we make sure that climate change is present in this WASH BAT analysis. First of all, it's very interesting to mention that since the new constitution in 2008 of Ecuador, nature's rights, or the intrinsic rights of nature, have been recognized, which means that any activity, any project, any intervention needs to consider how it affects nature, the health and the well-being of nature, and there is also a possibility to have litigation processes in the name of nature. This is a whole different field, but it definitely underpins a lot of the efforts that the Ecuadorian government is doing in trying to look at how can we create a more sustainable development for the country. I think it's also key to know that Ecuador, because of having both the high altitude of the Andes, a big coastal zone with a lot of population, and the Amazon region, is highly vulnerable geographically and climate-wise to any changes in climate. The population is also considered vulnerable because of poverty, still high levels of inequality, but also that we still have a big population that depends on agriculture, for example, which makes it climate change a big threat to, for example, food security and basic services. When it comes to the WASH systems in specific, a lot of the systems depend on glacial melt water, for example, which is, of course, an issue when it comes to climate change, but we also have many systems in areas that are prone to flooding or prone to drought. Finally, or because of this context, Ecuador, in its commitment to, for example, the Paris Climate Agreement, has highlighted water as a key sector that needs to be looked at, both for mitigation, but primarily for adaptation, climate adaptation. However, it should be noticed that much of this on the focus on WASH and climate change is on water resources such as irrigation and water resource management, and often the WASH component or the service component is overlooked or not considered in the same way. And that was one of the reasons why we thought it was important to bring it into this WASH sector that often is not really prompted to look at climate change. Finally, it's also important to recognize that while climate change may not be in the national water law, there's definitely different regulations regarding, for example, looking at nature-based solutions or looking at water resources management in a holistic and kind of sustainable way in the country. Next slide, please. For some of the factors that we felt that were key to, as Richard mentioned, the very high, surprisingly high and gladly high integration of climate change into the roadmap that was the final product of the WASH BAT, was on the one hand the quite long and somewhat extended process of preparation that we had with the National Water Secretariat at the forefront and leading this process, but also bringing in actors such as Fundación Avina, Protos in Ecuador, and Water Steps, which are civil society organizations that work with WASH in the field, but also have some climate change and water resources management competences. And of course, we benefited a lot from the partnership with SIWI in developing the module and the criteria and the basis for the analysis a lot. We set up a special task force that developed this kind of analysis tool, or the component for climate change for the analysis tool. And throughout this process, we really made sure that the government, the National Water Secretariat, was leading and was part of it. But we also kind of strengthen our own capacities within the group to make sure that we could facilitate the process and support the different groups throughout the analysis as such. So in the end, that meant that we had a working group of 10 specialists that could participate in the analysis and work together with the different participants from the different sectors that were there. We also made a very intentional effort to make sure that we had climate change experts at the tables invited. We had water resources experts invited, both from government, from academia, and from civil society, to make sure that that knowledge was present and to kind of have these two worlds meet. And yes, indeed, the roadmap, the POEMBO roadmap that was developed from this, of the 20 activities that were prioritized, 13 or 65% of them addressed directly or indirectly climate, disaster risk management, or water resources protection. Next slide, please. To conclude, I would say that this, sorry?
That you've got 1 minute left.
Okay, super. So to conclude, I was just going to point out that definitely being the WASH-BAT, this tool that already exists for analyzing the WASH sector, to put on a climate change lens on that was really, it really could catalyze that analysis of the political and institutional governance analysis of how to bring together the climate change team and the WASH team. And with slightly modest modifications, I would say, to the analysis and to the process as such, we could make sure that these actors and different experts could sit together and agree on actions and bring together these lines of work that at least here in Ecuador often don't meet. On kind of the immediate results side, we could definitely see an increased awareness and recognition of the impact of climate change in the sector. There was this very concrete proposal set of activities that we could use to promote this integration. And from UNICEF side, it definitely opened up to many new and interesting strategic alliances. For example, we're now setting up the National Roundtable on Sanitation, Wastewater and Climate Change. And we're also participating in the National Coalition on Water Security. However, it must be recognized that with the COVID crisis, and we've had 3 ministers' changes since the roadmap was formulated, the implementation is taking more time than we hoped. And but we do hope that, or we know that there is a strong commitment from the sector and from many actors. So we're hopeful that once things settle down and kind of go back a bit more to normal, that we can get new forces and new strengths to get up and running again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Moa, for bringing in 5 minutes the number of lessons learned from Ecuador. As you mentioned, I mean, I think that it's very important to remark the fact that the workshop required a lot of preparation in advance. I mean, to adapt all the criteria, particularly those related to climate change, and basically also to bring climate experts into the table. So yeah, I think that you've mentioned that various meetings were required, both remotely and physical. So it's important to take these lessons learned, particularly for those countries that would like to follow your example. So thanks a lot. And I'm sure that many participants or attendees will raise a number of questions that can be further discussed in the Q&A session. Thank you. And now it's turn, Henning, next slide, please. Yeah, it's turn now for our second speaker, Mr. Francis Odhiambo, who is Chief of WASH at UNICEF Tanzania. In Tanzania, a national WASH-BAT was also conducted last January, integrating also this climate perspective. So yeah, let me give the floor to Francis to learn a bit more about this process. Francis, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Ricard, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all attendees. So as you've heard, my name is Francis Odhiambo, and I'm the WASH Chief at UNICEF Tanzania. UNICEF also co-chairs the Development Partners Group for Water. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share with you our journey on the WASH analysis, water bottleneck analysis, which we undertook in January of this year. But before I start, maybe just a few general points about the sector in Tanzania? Well, so the sector is beset by a number of structural issues, I suppose, which most countries are grappling with and constrain the achievement of the SDGs. Now, one of these is the human resources, and specifically for the sanitation and hygiene subsector, where there's very little presence on the ground at the grassroots. Coordination, whether it be sectoral or interministerial, is also weak, and this has obvious implications for taking the climate change agenda forward. Budgeting and financing is also an issue, as is data for effective planning and measuring progress in terms of the attainment of the SDGs. So with that in mind, what were the reasons for including climate change in our WASH BAT analysis? Well, a significant proportion of Tanzania's population, next slide please. A significant proportion of Tanzania's population is dependent upon agriculture, which of course is going to impact, for example, food security. Estimates have shown that maize yield will reduce by about 33%, but also climate change is expected to shrink rangelands. And in a country such as Tanzania, this is really important for livestock keeping communities. And this shrinkage in rangelands is going to be aggravated because 60% of the existing rangelands are already infested. And likewise, climate change is going to impact the availability of water. 2/3 of households are dependent on groundwater, surface water, and rainwater, of course. So climate change and variability is going to have an impact on this. And on the ground, we can see clear evidence. In southwestern Tanzania, Lake Rukwa has receded by about 7 kilometers, but more alarmingly, is the rapidly disappearing glaciers on Mount Kilimanjaro. So the flight path into Tanzania actually goes over Kilimanjaro, and it is very, very obvious to anybody who happens to be on a daylight flight how quickly these glaciers have receded. They've already receded by about 80%, and by 2025 it's expected that they will have gone completely. So we really do need to reduce the risks that a changing climate pose to sustainable development. The third reason why we did this was that though there is a national adaptation program of action, there is very limited data on the impacts of climate change in Tanzania. Also, perhaps this is a bit of a strong statement that to say that climate change does not feature as a policy priority. It certainly does feature in policies, and the policies are in place, and as I've said, there's a NAPA, but there is a lack of implementation, or there's a lack of momentum around implementation. This is partly due to the limited internal capacity, if you like, to fund adaptation activities, but also at community level, the low incomes, especially amongst vulnerable groups, I think it would be fair to say limits their ability to adapt. So also in recent years, we've seen the development of new financing mechanisms, but Tanzania has not really been able to tap into these. So we saw WASH BAT as an entry point, if you like, to open discussions with the government about climate resilient WASH and more broadly. But of course, as you all know, climate change is a multidisciplinary, it's a multi-sectoral theme, and which requires strong coordination. But as we also all know, it's very, very difficult anywhere to ensure that you have joined up government. And that is something that we are grappling with. Next slide. So to what extent did the tool and the process meet our expectations? Well, our experience with the WASH BAT was actually really good. The tool is structured. We found that it was comprehensive in its coverage of the sub-themes. We put together an expert panel who had the opportunity to review the climate change module. It was comprised of people from academia, from government, and also from civil society, and they were quite satisfied that the module addressed all the relevant areas that it needed to. In terms of the process, we found that it was the way it is structured, it is very participatory. It allowed for open discussion and included stakeholders from government, but others as well who would generally not have had a voice, and they had an opportunity to contribute to these discussions. So in terms of process, it worked very well. We also found that it provided a unique opportunity for an objective assessment of the sector's status. And of course, with the government being heavily represented in amongst the participants, there was always the danger that bias could be introduced, but I think because of the way the tool is structured, this eliminated the possibility that bias would be introduced. And for Tanzania, certainly many of the recommendations that came out prioritized climate-related actions, signaling the need, I think, to strengthen policy, to strengthen plans and strategy, etc. And also, I would say that the iterative process of prioritizing over a number of rounds, if you like, lent credence to the call for action which came out of the WASH BAT. So next slide, please. In terms of the next steps that we will be taking, first, I should say upfront that we have not really done much. And the reason for this is that, as you've heard, we did the analysis in January of this year, and then it took a month or a couple of months for the reports to come out, by which time, of course, we had the COVID-19 outbreak and we had our hands full with the preparedness and response. However, there is a silver lining in this, because we do expect a general election in the next month and a half within Tanzania. So shortly after that, we'll have an opportunity to advocate with a new government, and we'll be engaging with all the necessary ministries, departments, agencies to refresh them on the process that we undertook, how we conducted the analysis, the findings, and of course the proposed action plan. But for good advocacy, you need evidence. And for this reason, as an immediate step, what we hope to do is to undertake a situation analysis just to understand the current status in respect of climate change in Tanzania. This will need to be a collaborative effort, of course, and it will not just be UNICEF-led. It will bring together the Development Partners Group for Water, working very closely with government, of course, and we hope that it'll be government-led. We will also engage with the Ministry of Water as the anchor stakeholder, if you like, to develop a climate mitigation and adaptation strategy for WASH. And we'll be looking to integrate climate risks into policies, into strategies, into plans, etc. And this needs to be done across all sectors, not just WASH. So we'll need to figure out the role of the wider UN system in doing this. Fortunately for us in Tanzania, we're just about to embark on the development of the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, which will provide an entry point for more holistic planning around climate change. And finally, we'll need to be working with the relevant authorities to formulate a sector-wide capacity development plan on climate. We think this is really important to increase awareness of climate change impacts excuse me, in government, but also civil society and also among communities, so that, you know, as we exploit natural resources, this is done in an environmentally friendly way and in a sustainable way. But in addition to this, we also need to develop the capacity, I think, of all actors, certainly in the WASH sector, to develop bankable projects so that the country can begin to access some of the financing instruments that are now available. So with those few remarks, I'd just like to thank you all for your time, and I'll hand over to Ricard for the next speaker. Over.
Thank you very much, Francis, for this inspiring talk. Very interesting to see that the WASH BAT provided this opportunity, as you mentioned, to start discussing with the government climate issues and their impacts on WASH. And also very nice to see the outputs of the WASH BAT, apart from the action plans, such as this new climate strategy for the WASH sector or this sector-wide capacity development plan. So I'm very sure that their implementation is going to be very challenging, but very nice to see, or to follow up if there's any progress made in this regard in the following months. Thanks a lot, Francis. And it's now turn for our final speaker. She comes from Bolivia. She will deliver her presentation in Spanish, as I've mentioned before, but I will briefly summarize at the end of her intervention the key remarks. Just to say that this case study is relevant for two different aspects, I would say. First, it's implemented at the municipal level, so it will be nice to see how these climate change issues are addressed at the municipal level. And second, that it was the first time in Montero that the WASH BAT was implemented for follow-up purposes. So a first WASH BAT was implemented in 2018, and then in 2020, it was repeated to follow up on previous actions agreed and also to integrate this kind of climate perspective into the assessment. So having said that, let me first introduce Irma Peredo. She's a WASH specialist at UNICEF Bolivia. Irma, es un placer tenerte hoy aquí en esta sesión y nada, te dejo la palabra para que nos cuentes un poquito más cómo fue el proceso en Bolivia, en las municipalidades de Montero y Santa Cruz, sobre la integración de la perspectiva del nuevo cambio climático en el WASH BAT. La palabra es tuya, Irma. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Irma Peredo, WASH specialist in UNICEF Bolivia. I ask you to allow me to make my presentation in Spanish. Thank you very much. Voy a hablarles un poco, como nos decía Richard, sobre el WASH BAT desarrollado en Bolivia, en el cual hemos incluido dentro de WASH los componentes de cambio climático y protección, y lo hemos aplicado a nivel municipal en 2 municipios de Montero y Santa Cruz que se encuentran dentro de Bolivia en el área de amazónica. Next, please. En la inclusión a nivel municipal del cambio climático en WASH, en el WASH BAT que desarrollamos en Montero y Santa Cruz, tiene este proceso. Primero, realizamos un taller de WASH BAT el 18, que inicia todo el proceso de cómo hemos empezado a trabajar bajo una nueva visión el WASH BAT. En este primer taller en Montero, en este municipio, se ve cómo se gana la confianza de los diferentes actores a nivel municipal, a nivel de las organizaciones de base, a nivel de juntas vecinales, a nivel de los operadores de servicios de agua y saneamiento, a nivel de las diferentes áreas y sectores que tienen que ver con WASH, como es educación, como es salud. ¿Qué se gana en este primer WASH BAT? Por un lado, la confianza de los diferentes actores, la coordinación entre los diferentes actores y fundamentalmente las responsabilidades que cada uno debe cumplir para concluir en ese WASH BAT, en un plan de acción. Por otro lado, hacer una firma de una declaratoria que pueden ver ustedes en la foto que está aquí abajo, donde todos los actores firman esa declaratoria. Es una muestra de que todos estamos de acuerdo, desde el representante de la Junta Vecinal hasta el alcalde, en lo que vamos a implementar. Y ahí se determina también elaborar un plan municipal de agua y saneamiento de Montero, que después concluye, está en ejecución. ¿Cómo nace esta inclusión más fuerte del cambio climático dentro de WASH? Nosotros tenemos en Bolivia un proyecto inicialmente que era de saneamiento descentralizado urbano en 3 municipios. En ese proyecto y con las evidencias de que en los municipios que implementábamos, principalmente en Montero y Santa Cruz, existía mucha vulnerabilidad en el tema de cambio climático y ameritaba profundizar esta temática. Es así que en coordinación con la Embajada de Suecia, que es nuestro financiador, determinamos incluir el cambio climático dentro de este proyecto que se convierte en un programa intersectorial que incluye cambio climático y incluye también protección de la niñez, niñas y adolescentes. Entonces, este programa integrado ya nos da la mirada de la importancia del cambio climático dentro de WASH. Posteriormente, en enero de este año, hemos realizado 2 talleres simultáneos. Como decía Ricardo, en el primero de Montero era el segundo ya, que hacíamos una evaluación de lo que se había elaborado ya antes en ese WASH BOT inicial, y por otra parte hacíamos también una actualización del plan de acción que podíamos realizar para posterior. Y en Santa Cruz, que es uno de los municipios más grandes de nuestro país, determinábamos un nuevo plan de acción con la inclusión de cambio climático como un elemento central. En este evento, que era simultáneo de 2 municipios, tuvimos la participación de más de 110 personas, donde estaban, qué importancia es, las organizaciones sociales, estaban los técnicos municipales de diferentes áreas de WASH, salud, educación, cambio climático, defensorías, estaban también los representantes del gobierno departamental, los operadores de servicios de agua y saneamiento, que son los que se encargan de proveer el servicio de agua y saneamiento en cada municipio. De los 3 lugares estaban los operadores y comités de agua potable y saneamiento, que son los más chiquititos, los rurales. También estaba la cooperación, estaban ONGs, estaban autoridades a nivel nacional y hasta tuvimos la participación de la ministra de Medio Ambiente y Agua y el viceministro. Todos viendo cómo avanzamos en este propósito de WASH BAT, incluyendo cambio climático y protección.
Irma, por favor, si puedes avanzar, porque bueno, nos quedan 2-3 minutos de intervención. Ok.
En ese evento fue fácil la integración de WASH, en ese simultáneo de WASH con cambio climático. ¿Qué fue lo que tuvo éxito en esto? Hicimos una preparación con varios actores donde ya inicialmente revisamos los criterios para poder seleccionarlos, pusimos unos listados de criterios con enfoque de cambio climático y los pusimos a la mesa y eso facilitó rápidamente la discusión. Next, please. Next slide. Esta experiencia municipal de la inclusión del cambio climático en el WASH BAT a nivel municipal fue importante porque nos dimos cuenta de que si bien a nivel municipal ellos sienten que es muy importante el cambio climático, han estado muy propositivos en su inclusión, pero nos dimos cuenta que no comprendían la envergadura a nivel municipal de lo que es el cambio climático, cuáles son los impactos del cambio climático, cuál es la relación del cambio climático con la adaptación al cambio climático, la resiliencia, ¿no? Que habían las falsas creencias de que el cambio climático es igual que el cambio del clima o el estado del tiempo, por ejemplo, ¿no? Entonces, se tenía que profundizar. Los operadores de servicios de agua y saneamiento que les mencionaba en estos municipios también tomaron conciencia de que el tratamiento de residuos que hacen es insuficiente y genera impactos negativos en el medio ambiente, pero se sentían limitados en sus conocimientos técnicos y en poder contar con recursos financieros que les permitan abordar mejor esta temática. Por otro lado, ellos mismos también, y en esta área de amazónica, se dieron cuenta que el consumo de energía eléctrica y los sistemas de extracción de agua que hacen en esta área es excesivo y impacta también negativamente al medio ambiente. Y otra reflexión, la importancia de introducir la temática de la economía circular que estamos trabajando para el reuso de aguas, de heces, de orina que se dan en estas áreas. Next, please. Ahora, las lecciones aprendidas de estos WASH BATs a nivel municipal nos están sirviendo de base para el WASH BAT nacional de todos los departamentos y municipios del país que actualmente estamos organizando. ¿Qué lecciones hemos sacado y cómo lo estamos planteando este WASH BAT? Primero, la preparación la estamos haciendo con más tiempo, meses de anticipación, donde estamos analizando con mucho más cuidado cómo vamos a llevar adelante este evento. Por otra parte, hemos conformado y hemos visto la necesidad de conformar un comité de organización, pero no solamente que se encargue de organizar el evento, sino más bien de participar en la ejecución y fundamentalmente de hacer el seguimiento posterior al taller de los acuerdos y acciones que se han tomado, que eso nos va a dar importancia. En este comité están participando las agencias de las Naciones Unidas, organismos internacionales, está participando también ONGs, la cooperación, la academia y otros sectores. En esta fase la estamos haciendo muy técnica. Primero vamos a hacer todo un análisis técnico. Este grupo y este comité está trabajando con 3 grupos a su vez, en 3 temáticas que hemos considerado claves e importantes. Por uno, el cambio climático, la otra, el tema del marco legal e institucional del sector y el otro, el tema de finanzas. Estos grupos están trabajando con expertos adicionales que están preparando documentos y exposiciones que se darán en el taller de WASH BOT nacional que se va a llevar adelante el año 2021. Y estamos seguros con este evento, va a marcar una agenda estratégica de la política pública y va a incorporar importantes desafíos, no solamente de los SDGs que vamos a apuntar con el tema de agua, saneamiento e higiene en las diferentes áreas del país, sino también esos desafíos que vienen con las crisis sanitarias como las que estamos viviendo. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Irma, por tu intervención y por compartir las lecciones aprendidas en Montero y en Santa Cruz. I'll try now to briefly summarize very rapidly the key issues raised by Irma, and I'll try to mainly focus on two different aspects that I consider are quite relevant. Basically, that the rationale for integrating climate change was driven by the need to assess the municipal sanitation program. So it was then when they realized that we need to increase resilience of sanitation technologies, and then we need to increase or to better understand which are the climate threats and hazards to our sanitation programs. So that's a good lesson learned here. And of course, the other lesson that I think that it makes a lot of sense to share is how would you learn from the municipal level, now you are implementing it or trying to improve the preparation of the national WASH bed. So basically, I think that you've highlighted that there's a lot of preparatory work needed, that there's also the need to document all climate-related issues to inform the WASH bed process. And of course, I think this really an idea of setting up a task force for this purpose. So very nice, Irma, to having you here today. Thanks a lot. And I will now move to a very rapid question and answer session. I would like to all speakers not to invest more than 1 minute. Henning, can you move for the next slide, please? We have received some questions from the audience, so I'll try to direct one question to each of the panelists. First question to Moa is, what is, in your opinion, those bottlenecks that have been identified during the WASH bed that wouldn't be identified otherwise if the climate issues wouldn't be integrated in the assessment? So what was the difference between integrating this climate perspective in this assessment? Not sure if you can highlight some specific issues to address this question more in 1 minute. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Well, I think that maybe first just to say that one of the key components of also the participation that we had in the WASH bed throughout this process was to bring in both government, the regulator, civil society, academia, but also the community service providers were at the table during this exercise. And I think that this really made for a horizontal dialogue between the different actors where the focus specifically looking at climate change did not end up just on speaking about regulation or needing new laws or modifying the political landscape, but it actually something that became very clear was how these small community WASH service providers are one of the key links, especially in the rural areas or specifically in the rural areas of Ecuador, which are the most vulnerable to climate change, and how they really need more support. They need more capacities, but because they, on one hand, they provide the services and need to make sure that these are resilient to any changes, be it more rain or less rain or flooding, etc. But they are also the ones who are the custodians of the water resources, and often they are the ones who take care of the watershed. They are the ones who have the control of the land where the water is produced or where it comes into the system. So I think that was definitely an aspect that was very key to the analysis, to really show the importance of these actors as being both the custodians of the services and the custodians of the water resources, and showing the importance of the government being closer to them, supporting them and providing resources for their ability to become more resilient and to learn about these issues. Because something that we saw is that while there was a fairly good understanding of maybe disaster risk management or kind of understanding what what the imminent threat were to the systems, this idea of looking at long-term predictions on climate data or looking at the long-term patterns and how that may shift for their water resources is not something that these organizations are used to or have the capacity of or have the data to be able to do. So I think that was definitely a key new element that came in by bringing in the climate experts and the climate analysis.
Thank you, Moa, for your answer. Then I do have a question for Francis. Basically, the question reads like, there is of course climate issues that affect the resilience of the waste services, but did you take into consideration in the assessment other potential issues that might also challenge the resilience of waste services in the medium and long term? So which kind of other issues you took into consideration into the assessment? Thank you, Francis. I would appreciate if you could rapidly answer the question in 1 minute.
Thank you very much for the question. To be honest, we did not really go there because of where we are in terms of climate change being a priority or the lack of priority around climate change in Tanzania. So really what we wanted to achieve with this WASH-BAT was and integrating climate change was that entry point which I mentioned, so that we could begin to have sector-wide discussions really about the importance of making sure that climate change is embedded and is integrated into all programming around WASH and including services. That was our aim. We intend to have another WASH-BAT within, I would say, well, initially we thought that we'd have one within 18 months. That's probably now not going to happen because of everything that has happened in between. But maybe within another 18 to 24 months from now, we could have another WASH-BAT, and then would be looking more deeply, I think, into the aspects that you mentioned. So for now, it was more of a tactical move, and it was just to set the scene so that we could have this dialogue opened with government. Over.
Thanks a lot, Francis. And now one final question to Irma, which will read as, I mean, now it's turn to start implementing, of course, all these kind of prioritized climate-related activities. Which are, in your opinion, the key elements that will enable or hamper a sound implementation of these initiatives? And basically, if you're optimistic in this regard, in terms of, do you think that you'll be able to implement all the activities that were prioritized in the WASH-BAT? Irma, una última pregunta para ti, que básicamente se centraría en intentar conocer tu opinión acerca de cuáles crees que son los elementos que pueden ayudar o obstaculizar una buena implementación de las actividades relacionadas con el cambio climático que se priorizaron en el taller, y si personalmente eres optimista, es decir, si crees realmente que se podrá implementar la hoja de ruta tal y como se pactó tanto en Montero como en Santa Cruz. 1 minuto, por favor, Irma, para la respuesta.
Gracias. Yo creo que hay elementos centrales para poder tener la implementación de las actividades o del plan de acción que se suscriben en los WASH-BAT, ¿no? Y ahí yo creo que es fundamental, o sea, por un lado, cuando se hace la preparación del taller, tener muy bien seleccionados los participantes, quienes van a estar en el taller. Segundo, ¿quiénes van a participar en las mesas de trabajo? No es aleatorio. Nosotros lo que hemos hecho es buscar de que cada mesa que tiene que ver una temática, agua, saneamiento, esté conformada con diferentes niveles, nacional, subnacional, de la academia, de los operadores de servicios, de la población, de las organizaciones de base. Eso permite que las discusiones también sean mucho más igualitarias en el plan de acción que se va a formular. pero algo que es importante también y que lo estamos tomando en cuenta es que no solamente la declaratoria que se firma en Bolivia, que es un documento que tiene un carácter muy fuerte porque lo que se comprometen son las mismas organizaciones de base que hacen el control social para que cumplan, pero muchas veces las organizaciones de base, los temas técnicos no tienen el conocimiento y hay las justificaciones del nivel municipal o del operador que no se ha podido hacer. Entonces ahí yo creo que funciona y es muy importante este comité de trabajo que tiene que estar durante todo el proceso y que tiene que hacer el seguimiento a la implementación después de concluido el taller y las conclusiones que se hacen. Y este comité tiene que reunirse bilateralmente con las partes, reunirse interiormente para ver dónde está el cuello de botella para implementar una actividad X y cómo hacemos que eso se mueva para que se implemente. Porque si dejamos el plan de acción que fluya solamente por el compromiso que se han hecho, ahí no soy optimista en que se logre. Pero si un comité impulsa y apoya y aprieta que eso sí se haga, es más factible que se pueda ejecutar y que se pueda implementar porque hay un seguimiento. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Irma. Thank you very much. I'll try to highlight, her major remarks. She pointed out two different aspects in terms of promoting a sound implementation of the activities. First, she related to the need to select the participants of the workshop very carefully, and also to highlight, she highlighted also the need to develop group works that balance different types of expertise so that the activities that are somehow agreed on are feasible in relation to their implementation. And then she also highlighted a very good point in terms of setting up a committee that is not only in charge of the preparation of the workshop, but also on the implementation on the action plan that has been agreed, so that at the end of the workshop, there is a kind of committee that will take charge of this monitoring and trying to identify, in case of any activity that has not been properly implemented, to identify which are the bottlenecks, and so and from them to address this the poor implementation of those activities that have not been properly implemented. So thank you very much to all three speakers. It's now turn to move on, and basically I would like to give the floor to Dr. Guy Hutton from UNICEF New York.
Thank you. So, we've heard very short extracts from three really wonderful examples of WASH implementation, and in particular focusing on the innovations in the area of climate change. So, just in closing, I know we're running late, so I'll try to keep this brief. I think overall, and we've been implementing WASH since 2011 when it was first created, it presents a unique opportunity where it brings all partners into the room with open discussions and a sort of very systematic methodology to take everyone through and keep everyone on the same page to come to the conclusions. So it also provides a huge opportunity to strengthen government leadership where it's a bit lacking, and to align partners behind one national plan. And I just want to note that although UNICEF developed and supported the tool rollout, it is an organization-neutral tool. It's available at www.washbat.org, and it doesn't have any UNICEF logos on it. So, this obviously, we hope gives the message that anyone can really pick it up and support governments to implement it, and also to work with UNICEF in its implementation. If you already have a joint sector review in your country, then the WASHBAT does actually provide a systematic analysis and proposals that go into the joint sector review and make it much more sort of solid and evidence-based. And this has been done in several countries, for example, Pakistan over several years, the provincial level, and more recently in Zimbabwe. So the washback can be used to highlight new issues and to enable systematic review of the building blocks and collaborative behaviours espoused by the Sanitation and Water for All partnership. And we've seen some great examples of application for climate change, but also we've got a number of criteria to analyze the humanitarian development nexus. So it enables you to look how to build systems, strengthen systems in more fragile countries. And so it's been used recently in Syria, in Iraq, Somalia, and many other fragile countries. There are, of course, many challenges you find when you do the analysis. Many criteria score red, as in the traffic light system, and there are many solutions being proposed. So some prioritization and sequencing is needed, and that's where we really need partners to sort of step up and say they'll support some of these system strengthening activities. So preparation is key, as you heard from the examples. You get out what you put in, but also follow-up is key. You can't just finish with a nice report and good intentions. You actually have to follow up. And repeat applications are possible. Some countries have applied it at least twice, and there is in the tool itself, the online tool, there is a function to enable you to rescore bottlenecks and identify new bottlenecks. So the tool facilitates that. We're continually learning. Over the 9 years of its implementation, it's already gone through one radical change when it went online and aligns behind the SWA building blocks in terms of its structure. We're adding these criteria for climate and fragility. And there's a lot of learning ongoing from all the country experiences, and there's a new report that our partners, SIWI, have produced, which will be available soon, which reviews the experiences from the last 4 years of WASH implementation. Also a new thing, Arabic, the language Arabic is being added to the current 4 languages of English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So there'll be more potential for application in the Middle East and North Africa countries. And in the coming days, there'll be new pages with resources and materials for workshops and actual reports from previous WASH exercises. So the website is under continual development. Anyway, I really appreciate you joining the session and staying on to the bitter end. And I look forward to, and please do contact us either through SIWI or to me directly. And we look forward to working with anyone who's interested in learning more and joining a WASH exercise in a country. Thank you, and back to Ricard.
Thanks. Very glad, Guy, to see that you could finally make it. We've reached the end of the session. First of all, I would like to recall that the session has been recorded, so it will be available at the World Week website, at the website of the event, so you can download it from here. Please contact me. Here you have my email. If you want to contact any of the speakers, I'll be glad to put you in contact with them. And finally, a big thank you to all speakers and also to Guy Hutton, who has kindly agreed on providing these concluding remarks. I think that it has been a great session, so thanks a lot for participating. Thank you all the audience to attend the session. And finally, I would also like to thank my colleague Henning, who has been on the production side. It's not a nice role, so thank you very much for your great job. Having said that, wish you a happy end of the World Water Week, and keep you in touch with those that that work in the sector. Thanks a lot, and have a nice evening. Bye bye.